This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, welcome, and thanks for joining us today to talk about the First Amendment. We are working hard to have a series of discussions on the law, the Constitution, and some other important principles that relate to our country, preserving freedom, helping out to stand up for what's right. And we feel that by discussing these and having the opportunity to go through them, we are better able to help people, to help the country, and to explain and take a stand for the things that we believe in. Through discussing, we gain the ability to understand more about our own thoughts and feelings, and we gain the ability to be able to, I'd say, put our actions and thoughts more in line with things that we really believe. We start to understand how they translate into a lot of different areas of life. So today we're going to talk about the First Amendment. The First Amendment text is here. Let's see. And it tells us that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there's a couple of, I shouldn't say a couple, there's a few different things it's addressing in here. It talks about an establishment of religion, the free exercise of religion, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right of the people to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Today we're going to try and touch on each one of those a little bit as we go through and talk about some of the different aspects associated with each one. So first we have the case. This is a real Supreme Court case, Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. And it was heard in the year 2000. And Elias, could we get you to read that scenario to us?
Texas's Santa Fe Independent School District implemented a policy that permitted student-led, student-initiated prayer at football games. Students could vote on who could pray and the things they could say. The school district was sued over the policy by people who argued the school was imposing religious views on them. The school district defended, saying that it was students, not the district, who were exercising the freedom of religion, and that such constituted private speech and exercise of religion, which the government could not ban. Those suing the district claimed it was public governmental speech that imposed religious views because it came over the school's public address system by a speaker representing the school student body under the supervision of school faculty and pursuant to a school policy.
Thank you. So in looking at this a little bit, we have a situation where a school district decided that it would allow students to initiate prayer at football games before the game started. The Supreme Court has held in the past that students are free to exercise their religion even if it's on school property. And so the school district said, well, if they're free to do that, then they can certainly say a prayer at the football games as long as they're the ones in charge and the ones doing it. And so the school district was sued over it. And this is the case that came out of that with the Supreme Court and the arguments. So I'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts are over whether this should be constitutional, should not be. Because remember, if we go back on the Constitution, it says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So the Constitution does ban respect for an establishment of religion, but it also bans any laws that prohibit the free exercise of religion. So if we're here where the school district's saying, hey, it's the students exercising their religion, other people say, no, this is the government promoting an establishment of religion. And what are your thoughts on where that falls?
So how is that, I guess, how is it different? How does the court see that different from you reciting the Pledge of Allegiance at a game or singing the Star Spangled Banner?
It's a great question. Because one thing that happens is that there is still prayer before Congress starts its sessions. Lawmakers still pray. They're very governmental. But the Supreme Court's gone through case by case, and they've determined that in some situations, the things being said are historical in nature. It's more based in history than in religion, they say. So the Star Spangled Banner, they say, is part of the culture and history of America, same as the Pledge of Allegiance. And so they still allow those things to be promulgated in the schools. But
So they're defending history and culture more than religion?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep. But again, the Supreme Court's rationale for it is the Constitution actually bans the government from favoring or promoting an establishment of religion. And so they say they have to do that, but they're not banned from promoting history. Constitution.
Okay, so can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
So one of the questions at issue, I think, on these things is, does the Constitution apply to the state, meaning the individual states, or does it apply to the federal government? And the question, one of the questions was all the different amendments, do they apply to the state, or do they apply to being the federal government, or do they apply to the individual states? And so that is something that has morphed over the years.
Yeah, so it's a great question. If we go back to the slide here, it says Congress shall make no law. So the First Amendment itself is expressed to Congress, federal government. And when the country was founded, states still very much had preferred religions at the time. That's one of the things the colonies had, is they were all different religions, all different groups. They had the things they liked and the laws based on their religion and things. And one of the reasons the United States was such a hot topic for the colonies was because they were afraid the bigger colonies with their religion would force them to join their religion. And so what happened was none of them wanted to give up their religions they had, and they didn't want to be forced by other states to do that. So they put a prohibition on Congress, said the federal government can't take any steps that favor a religion or promote or respect, I guess the word's respect. They can't make any laws that respect that establishment of religion. And they also can't prohibit us from exercising our religion. So they were basically saying, we want the federal government to remain neutral, let the states do their thing. So over the years, to John's point, what happened was after the Civil War, the country passed the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment said that citizens of the United States will no longer be able to, or it says that states can no longer abridge privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Since that time, the Supreme Court's gone through and decided on a case-by-case basis which of the first 10 constitutional amendments apply to the states. And one of them they've determined is they've said that the 14th Amendment clearly makes it so that the First Amendment applies to the states and the state actions. So to answer John's question, we do end up in this situation where the First Amendment says Congress, but because of the 14th Amendment and Supreme Court precedent, this is currently applied to states. Schools are operated by states. So again, when we get back to this situation with the school district, they're run by the state. It's a government function. In addition, the federal government provides so much funding to the states that we're in a situation where there's excessive federal involvement anyways. They're making a lot of the rules and things. And so under current Supreme Court precedent, all schools that are public in nature are very much required to respect the Constitution, at least as it's interpreted currently. So we certainly didn't go into that question extensively today, at least in this slide. But that is a little bit of the history there. And so yes, the school district, according to current precedent, is on the hook for that. And so we're trying to decide, is this respecting an establishment of religion with this prayer that's taking place? Or will Congress or the states be prohibiting free exercise of religion if these students aren't allowed to pray in this manner?
I think, to me, it sounds like it would be restricting, because if they don't allow them, because they're not respecting any one establishment, they're letting whoever gets voted in to pray. So it could be, over time, it's all sorts of churches that could be. So I guess they're not favoring one over the other. I assume maybe they could even expand it to somebody who doesn't necessarily pray but says something inspirational. I don't know. But it seems like it's open enough that it shouldn't be a problem to me.
Okay, appreciate that. Those are some good points. Anyone see anything else there?
I'm just thinking about my schooling. I mean, me as a religious person, I would always, I'm in favor of prayer and religion stuff. And in high school, I feel like this never would have flown. In the high school that I went to allow someone to speak over the PA system, I think is what it's saying. And so I'm just me not knowing a ton about the Constitution. I feel like, at least that the court's probably ruled that this is not okay, because this is something that I just know would never happen in my high school. And even though I feel like it should happen, just on a personal belief of mine.
Yeah, so certainly based on experience, it's not something we're seeing a lot of right now. People praying over the school's PA system. But still interested to hear if someone has thoughts on why it might be a problem for the Constitution or for the government to allow something like that. I know it's not fun to take the other side sometimes, but it's always an interesting balance with the Constitution, where they're not supposed to respect an establishment of religion, but they're not supposed to prohibit the free exercise of religion. And so in this situation, the court did come out and say they felt it violated the Constitution because they said when it was pursuant to a school policy and over the school PA system, it conveyed the impression that the government was favoring a particular type of religion. In this area in Texas, there wasn't a lot of diversity of religion. And so, yes, to Alan's point, while people could vote, the students could vote, and in theory, other people could get in and practice, it wouldn't really happen. And so the government said no to this situation. So to Sam's point, do we see it today? I did see when I was in high school students that would gather outside of the flagpole and they'd pray every morning. And that is still allowed because that's a true student-initiated action under the Supreme Court precedent. And
So Austin,
yep.
I'm wondering what if they were deliberate in trying to diversify who was being able to pray over the intercom. Like I think of, those that pray before a legislative session or even, city council meetings. They're deliberate in making sure that the minister, the bishop, the pastor, or whoever, they mix it up to make sure that it's, it's many denominations. Would that, do you think, this would fly if they were deliberate in doing that in the school district?
It's a good question. And just to add a little bit to your point there, they have to be so careful now about letting all groups pray. Essentially, if someone requests the opportunity to pray, then these groups need to let them have an opportunity to pray. And so what happens right now is there's a group called the Satanists, and they go around and request an opportunity to pray. And so here in Utah, the last legislative session, there was a group of Satanists that gathered at the Capitol, and they led their group prayer to Satan. And so it does produce an interesting scenario, because they say, well, if it's allowed, in a situation such as in the legislature, then you have to let us in, or else you're expecting a certain establishment of religion. And so they've managed to get quite a few things in. Historically speaking, courts have allowed some monuments of the Ten Commandments or crosses for nativities or things to be placed on government property. Other times they require they be taken down. And whenever they're allowed to be let up, the Satanists then immediately send a petition and say, we want to put a statue of Satan right next to it. And so they're certainly challenging on these equality type grounds that the court has gone to. But to Elias's question, whether the school district would have been any better off, the answer is no. In this situation, the government has come down pretty hard. The courts have come down pretty hard and said that schools, prayer in school, they said, is in their opinion, a purely religious function. And no matter who they let pray or how many groups or diversity they get, they still aren't going to let them do it in public schools. And that's just essentially where the courts have come. Again, it's super interesting to look at the kind of the broken body of precedent, because you'll have one city that's allowed to keep up their Ten Commandments statute, another city that's required to take it down. One city will be allowed to display a nativity, another city will be required to take it down. And it's super splintered on how the courts looked at it. But in the school system, they've come down consistently that the school cannot promote prayer in any form. And again, I'm always interested to hear thoughts if people think that's appropriate result for the Constitution, or if they think that in some situations, like Elias said, if they're super diligent about it and they get lots of different groups in there praying, if they should be allowed to pray because they're not respecting a particular religion.
I have a thought and a question. First of all, I'll ask the question in a second. Just the thought is that I think because this country was founded on like Judeo-Christian values, and that was like so important. I feel like I understand like the equality and trying to promote that and stuff, but I think because that's like what country was founded on, I think we should be able to legally like not allow Satanists to do those things. I mean, again, I guess that breaks a little bit of equality, but just a personal opinion. And then the question is, would like atheists and agnostics be legally considered a religious entity? Or if they want it, just because it's seeming like with this law that like prayer itself is favoring an establishment of a religion, even if it is, like trying to give all the religions an equal chance. And so to me, if they're saying prayer itself is favoring one, then I'll try to think of any religions that didn't pray, and the only one I can think of would be like atheists and agnostics. And so I was wondering if they're legally considered a religious entity, and therefore that's one reason that like prayer itself could be why you can't do that.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it's helpful, I think, to go back and look at, again, what the First Amendment says, where it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. It doesn't say that they shall make no law respecting religion. It says an establishment of religion. And yes, the courts have kind of taken the stance that, well, we can't respect any religion. We can't promote religion as a country. But what that has led to is the atheists actually are very insistent that they're not a religion. Because what happens is if you are a religion, you lose the ability to have some of your doctrine taught in public schools because you can't respect an establishment of religion. And so atheism wants to very much stay out of that because a lot of the theories or scientific things that are taught in school tend to push the views and the theories that they have. Again, if they were a religion, then the equality would say, well, schools have to teach all potential theories related to that religion or teach one that's not. So we have had an outgrowth in society where one claims not to be. And to your point, could we say prayer is historical? It's part of the country. It's not pushing any particular establishment. Yes. And those arguments have been made and they have won in congressional settings. So there still is prayer in the government, but they have not won in the school setting. And again, the courts are split, and there certainly is not a very good body of case law that's consistent in its reasoning with religion. Courts have struggled with this concept for quite a while. So it is certainly an interesting issue. But to me, from the way I see it, I certainly see this as saying that Congress can still promote religion in general, just not a particular establishment. And to that point, something that supports it is in the 90s under Bill Clinton, Congress actually passed what they called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And the act does give religious institutions certain freedoms that non-religious institutions do not have. And that has been determined to be okay because it's not respecting any particular establishment. It's just promoting religion in general. So that, again, the courts have adopted these arguments in some situations. They rejected them in others. And there's not a great logic that follows through it all. But we've ended up with school districts unable to promote any type of prayer. And it's just left up to the students there. But we have it in government. So are there any questions on that before we move on to the next one? And anytime you can ask questions for sure. So we're getting into a hot topic in society today. You'll hear quite a bit about this, so it's something I've wanted to delve into a little bit. Utah anymore has more and more proposals to start to regulate campaign finance money. And so this is an issue that we want to look at here. So Alan, could we ask you if you're in front of your screen, could you read that for us?
Yep. You decided it is important to run for president of the United States as others are not representing important principles. You recently met an older woman who believes strongly in you and is willing to give you $1 million to get your campaign started. She views the money as her way of saying to others that she believes in you. Should you take the money? Why or why not? I think you're going to need a lot more than $1 million.
Okay, it's true. It's interesting. I think the last couple of elections, each president has spent over $1 billion on campaigning. The one that gets through the primary and everything until the end. And that's obviously a concern for many people. But off the top of your head, morally speaking, what do you see as right or wrong in this situation? Should a candidate for office take $1 million from an older woman?
I think if she's of sound mind and she genuinely believes in it, and as long as you follow reporting, campaign reporting, finance laws and disclosures, she should have the right to give that $1 million to a cause that she believes in, even if that's you running for president.
Okay.
That's my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, appreciate those thoughts. Clint, are you, what are your thoughts here?
So I know that there are laws where old people are kind of taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And so I think family members can step in and kind of try to protect the older folks. So like if they think they're getting caught or something. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of situation came up in this, where they're like, oh, I don't think she really believes in you. You've tricked her or something. So I don't know how that would play out, but I do know that that's something to keep in mind.
For sure, definite legal issue there. And it's interesting here. And one thing I'm curious about, do any of you see, let's say that, let's just assume for a minute she's of true sound mind, her family understands, they sign off, all those things. Do any of you see any moral issues with this situation? And it's okay if you don't, but I'm curious if you do.
Well, I mean, you'd feel kind of indebted to her, and if she had certain views that she wanted to influence you after the fact, then that, you'd feel kind of an obligation, or other people would think that you at least held that obligation.
Okay. So there starts to become an issue here with, can they influence you with their money?
That's what I was gonna say. If she's giving it to you as a way to be able to influence you, then I don't know. Then there's moral issues. But if somebody truly just gave you $1 million and said, take it and do what you are planning on doing as president, then I don't see a problem with it.
So here's a question too, from the drilling down on the moral side. What is appropriate for us to be influenced by? What things should politicians be influenced by?
Oh, go ahead, Elias.
I was just thinking just what their constituents. I mean, yeah, they shouldn't be as swayed as heavily as they are by those who are funding their campaigns. Another quick note is, if there's a moral thing in my mind, is it's how it bothers me how much money's needed to be able to run for an office in our country. And I think part of that, I don't think it should be that way.
Yeah, so it's super interesting to look at the money involved. And we're certainly drilling down into a couple of important points here. And this is critical to understand what's going on and the issues at play. But Sam, I think you had something.
Yeah, just we're talking, like you're saying, should you be influenced by? I just saw a conversation on Facebook about someone was saying, be careful of this media source because they are funded by this billionaire, and so you can't trust it. But then someone else pointed out, like, he said, why do I care where the money comes from as long as what they're saying is like is correct and is true principles. And then he's cited a few other things that are also funded by large entities of wealth. And I think he listed the New York Times as one, but I'm not sure. But he listed a few like media sources, like these also are funded by these billionaires or something like that. And so like because I think there are a lot of things that are funded by rich people, right? And so I think that should also fall under this scope. If this was a law, that you can't be funded, because I mean, running for president, political office is one thing, but the media has just as much power or more, or in terms of influencing people as the president would, or something like that. I mean, the president can make law or veto laws and be part of that and stuff. So he has different powers, but like I think that the media and other things would have to fall under this as well as, but that's kind of common to have lots of funding for those things.
Yeah, and those are a lot of great points. That gets into a lot of the issues. We have a couple more slides on a number of those points with money and
Can I jump in real quick on this one, real quick, to make a point? So the question is she saying, I'm going to give you this $1 million, but I want you to ensure that my business gets, $100 million contract. The question is she saying, I support you? It doesn't matter whether if it's just support. I don't think there should be any issue. It's when there is, hey, you need to give me $100 million contract for my business. If I give you this money, that's where I think from the moral standpoint, because when I go to vote for someone or I talk to someone, I'm trying to influence that political figure all the time. We subconsciously or consciously trying to influence whatever political candidate it may be. If you just happen to have that kind of money, you get to have the financial influence of $1 million. But, basically people say, I'm not going to vote for you, or I am going to vote for you, is a very similar way of influence.
Yeah, and so those are great points. Again, from a legal perspective, looking at it, I shouldn't say again, just saying from a legal perspective, if we break it down a little. So let's say this older woman said, okay, here's $1 million. I just believe in you. Go do whatever you want to do. 2 years later, 2 years pass by, you're president, and you suddenly get a call and she says, hey, my son could really use this favor. And you took the money honestly at the time. She gave it honestly at the time, but now she needs a favor. And then what happens? And so in the law, is there a way to have evidence or to view things as, oh, this one was given genuinely, this one wasn't? How many years have to pass by before that person can ask for something or do something, even if they never mention $1 million? And just as a real life example happening currently in Utah, the primary election's coming up at the end of June, and there's a couple of incumbents who are in some tighter races, and the Utah legislature, some of the governing bodies and people, they sent out a letter to the major lobbying firms, and the letter said, we need you to donate to the incumbents to ensure the continuity of government. They said it's important that we keep things in place for the stability of the country right now, or our state right now. And so we need you to donate to the incumbents campaign. Now, there's nothing else said in that letter, but it's sent to the major lobbying companies. To me, that reeks of implicit direct bribery, saying, hey, if you want to be here and have any influence, you need to participate. If you're not going to help out, you're going to lose your seat or your position of influence up here. You'll be kicked out from the table. Now, these aren't things that I can prove, but it certainly happens. And so what's happened is the country, the United States, has passed quite a few campaign finance regulations, they call them. And there's thousands of these regulations if you want to run for federal office. And what they do is they actually limit individual contributions. So the max that an individual can contribute to a presidential campaign, I think the last one was about $2,500. So if you took this money from this older woman, you would very much go to jail. You can't take more than $2,500 from one person. And they say that they do that to help prevent corruption. They don't want candidates to be able to be bought, is what they say. But on the flip side, what that does is it makes it so that if you're not an incumbent, you have an extremely hard time raising money, because you have to have thousands and thousands of people that support you to raise enough money to fund your campaign. And so these campaign finance laws currently act as a very strong incumbent protection measure. And these campaign finance contribution limits have been challenged quite a bit in court over a restriction on the freedom of speech. This old woman, let's say there's been cases similar where someone like her sues and says, I'm speaking here, I'm telling the country, I'm telling this candidate, I'm speaking by giving $1 million to them. and you're abridging my freedom of speech. So on that issue, again, we have these moral quandaries of bribery and corruption and other things taking place. But from a very deep level, the Supreme Court's had to wrestle with the question of, is money speech? If they restrict money, are they restricting speech? So what are some of your thoughts on that?
It seems like, Austin, that I've part of the purpose of having the Senate and the House was to avoid like largely populated areas from having too much of a say over sparsely populated areas. The Senate, so the Senate, 2 per state, kind of equalized out if you're in California versus Wyoming. The House of Representatives is representative of the population, the Senate is representative of the number of states. And so then if you start saying, and I don't think I have the solution here, but if you start saying that, yes, this person can donate $5 million to this person because it's their way of supporting them, well, the other candidate that only has the support of poor people, he's going to lose because he doesn't have as much money, even though it maybe even is more people that like him. That would support him initially, I guess, or something like that. And so I guess it's kind of a weird line there for the courts to walk, because it seems like there's precedents for trying to protect the views of the minority, and so then you could get away from that if you're allowing people to donate with money.
Yeah, for sure. No, those are good points. And one thing to note with the Senate and the House, the Senate was set up to help smaller states not get overwhelmed by the population in larger states, kind of like you're talking about. Because again, when the 13 colonies were formed, there were some very large states and some very small ones. And another thing it did, though, was it served to put a check between the states and states' rights and individuals and what individuals wanted. The House of Representatives represented people, and the Senate was actually selected by the states when the country was formed. And it wasn't until the early 1900s there was a constitutional amendment passed that switched the election of senators from the state selecting them to the people selecting them. And when that happened, we actually lost kind of an important check and balance on the Constitution, because then at that point, the Senate before was interested in protecting states' rights because they were appointed by the states in answer to the states. But once they were directly elected by the people, they now reported back to the people, and their interest became far more aligned with the House of Representatives, of just doing what the people want, as opposed to having this check to maintain certain powers for the states. But yes, there are these, like you say, there are these disparities in representation. A senator from California is elected by crazy more people than a senator from Wyoming. And so there's incredible disparities in money involved, all kinds of things involved. But coming back here, because a lot of people take the position, money's not speech. The government can ban all money it wants to and not be infringing on the freedom of speech. And that's a very, very pervasive view right now, a very strong one that I'd say is right up there and about to take hold in the courts. And so it's one that I ask here to say, what do you think about that? Is money speech? Does money fall under the freedom of speech that the Constitution talks about?
Well, I think that it does fall under speech, but looking at other laws, your individual rights go as far as you're like not hurting others, I guess. I mean, in freedom of religion, if I say that my religion is the Native Americans and I want to cut people's hearts out and sacrifice them to my God, that's not going to fly legally. I can't do that. I can't go kill other people just because I say that's my religion, right? And so even if speech is speech, which I think it is in a way, they are allowed to ban certain of your money if it could hurt others. which I think they're trying to say that if you're using it in this political way, it could be damaging. But I am of the opinion that I don't like that a candidate needs to have so much money to run. I think something should be done about that. But if they see this as such a problem that it could corrupt people, then I think it is within the rights to ban this. But I also think they should look at how that applies in other ways. I mean, if if it's just presidential elections, or if you're sending so much money to certain campaigns, not campaigns, but like businesses or charities or things that have a lot of influence in the world, and could also have the same effect essentially, then that should also be looked at and regulated, and maybe not just a political election.
Yeah, so you make some good points saying even if it is speech, it doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want with it, because at some point, if there's harm, we allow for constitutional rights to be kind of restricted a little. In this situation, though, one of the things to understand too is, yes, if I want to sacrifice people, the law can say you can't go out and sacrifice people. But how much harm do we need to tolerate for constitutional principles? Currently, we'll jump to a slide back here. Fake news, they say, is causing all kinds of harm. And people say this is harming us, this is hurting us, this is hurting our country. And they're really pushing to ban it. And so, and this gets back to kind of this money as speech thing. And it's an interesting concept that's very rarely explored in the Constitution. We'll take a slight detour and come back to these points. So in the First Amendment, it says that Congress shall make no law, ... abridging the freedom of the press. That's how we would read that. So they can't abridge the freedom of the press. So a question for you is, who is the press? In today's day and age, who is the press?
I think it's us. I think it's media.
Whoever wants to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, right? We're all now publishing things, we're putting out stuff, we're saying things. And we typically think of the press as KSL and New York Times and these others. But in today's day, my take on it is we're all the press, like you say. We all have power of the press right now. And so now what we're getting into is this situation where, what does it take to publish something or to spread something? Can we talk? Can we be the press if there's not money involved?
Well, and also, like, in regards to who the press is, do foreign entities also represent the press? Like, do I feel like, Russia can be my press?
Yeah, great question. Great point. Because we have now people worldwide coming. So does Russia get constitutional protections to be press in America? Because again, it says right here, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of the press. So can Russia come say whatever it wants to say in American elections? Or is there an exception for that? Oops. So these are fascinating points, and this fake news one is a battle that's being played out right now, and it's becoming increasingly worrisome.
Could I make a comment as well?
Yeah.
One of the things that we just recently read a book called Carry On, Mr. Bowditch, and it was set in the time when Washington was Revolutionary Wartime. And Mr. Bowditch was pretty upset because there were reports against George Washington saying that George Washington, just putting him down, and he was saying it was wrong to put down someone of such high regard. And one of the other people in the book said, no, that's where you need the freedom, is people need to be willing to say what they believe and regardless of their opinion, to be able to really have true freedom of speech. So just a thought from what we were reading.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really important thought, because I'll give you some examples of things that have been determined to be fake news. Real life examples. There's a group called, I just forgot their name. They're a pro-life group, Live Action. They're called Live Action. And they posted a video, and in the video they said, they stated abortion is murder. That was their opinion, or their statement in the video. And they were classified by Facebook as fake news. And from that point on, Facebook stops sharing their views and their things, because they said, oh, that's fake news, that abortion's murder. That's not the case. And Prager University just got classified as fake news as well. They had a video of there's climate change activists that had a video of a polar bear starving, and they show the starving polar bear dying, and then they say in the video, this is because of climate change. That was the climate change activist video. Prager University looked at that and said, yeah, it's true, they found a video of a polar bear starving, but there's been no correlation or studying done to determine why that polar bear was starving. We don't know if it was sick and couldn't catch food for other reasons, or whether it was due to climate change or whatnot. And so their point was simply, yeah, there's a video of a polar bear starving, but that doesn't equal the causation that's being claimed in this other video. And they were classified as fake news as well. And so these are, again, these are situations where once someone has the power to decide what's true, who do we give that power to? Who are the people we trust enough to make those decisions for us about what's true or not? Because right now people say, well, it's crazy that we trust the average person to decide what's true, because we can all look at someone and say, oh, they're misled. But in the situation, in the country, who should we trust for what's true and what's not true? The people to decide, or some to decide for us?
I just feel like this is another thing of this world trying to take away personal responsibility and accountability, because you always have to sort through anything and figure out what you think is right and what seems right and what seems true and everything. Like why wouldn't it be the common person that needs to decide on this? Like, you should. That's why we have so many news outlets. You can read, if you have questions about a certain issue, you can study it and make your own opinions, and then voice your opinions to your to your senator or your congressman or whatever. And we're giving up, I feel like we're giving up a lot of our freedom if we allow somebody else to decide what's fake news on either side of the spectrum, right? Like, I don't want to limit, even if it's something that goes against my opinions, I don't want to limit it. I'd rather teach myself and my children to figure out how to sort through all of that and make their own opinions.
So can I jump in on this one? This kind of goes to, I'm going to say, a couple different issues. One of those being, do we have the perspective that the news should be apolitical? I think that's been historically kind of the idea that news should be non-political. That's what they like to trumpet. That's what they like to state. But Sam Donaldson was caught on tape being asked, I want to say it was by Project Veritiv, you've been a Democrat, you're an unabashed Democrat now, and you do more column pieces versus news pieces. Column pieces are where a columnist gives their opinion as opposed to actual reporting the news. And so he said, you have this position where you're reporting on the news, Did it ever change? And he's like, no, that's what I've always felt. And then he goes, well, how do we know that your news wasn't tainted then? So there's kind of that perspective. Then, in my opinion, we as consumers should go to and flow to the news that we think is best. I think there's that. There's a second perspective that's now happening with Facebook and with Twitter, especially, I would say, are the two main groups that are doing fake news. And
Definitely
what they
YouTube
have
as
asked
well.
for. What's that?
Just saying YouTube as well.
Oh, YouTube. You're right. So Google, Facebook, Google, which is YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And so what they are trying to promote is, we need to control the narrative, and so therefore we're a private company, so we have the ability, we can control what is said on our platform. We have that right. We have that responsibility because we're a private company. We need to be able to do that. But what they've asked for, so they can't be sued, is they have stated that they are a public square. Well, if you're a public square, you don't have to worry about being sued. And this goes back to somebody back in the mob days calls in a hit on an AT&T line or a Bell South or Bell North line. Bell was not held liable for the actions of someone putting a hit on someone because they were a public square. In the public square, anything could be said and nobody could be sued over it. But they're not acting as a public square because they are determining on what is said and what is not, but they're not liable. And so they have the liability taken away from them and they can control. So to me, there's like multiple, this is a big onion. So forgive me for giving those concepts out. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, and I'm going to let you explain it a little more.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Clint, do you have thoughts there?
The one that I kind of really like is when you look at Wikipedia and you're reading an article, there's a number of claims that come up in a given article. And as you're reading it, you'll see right next to a given fact that says citation needed, or it links to a given citation. So that it kind of calls out what is questionable. It calls out, this is kind of, we don't really know who said this or where it came from. It could be true, we don't know. And so in applying that kind of same logic to Twitter or Facebook, then I like the idea of posts being able to mark, say, hey, these are unsubstantiated, or we need further verification to know that these are true. The reason I like that kind of approach is it lets the person that is making the claim the opportunity for them to substantiate that. Maybe it gives them a way to say, oh, let me back this up. Here's where my source is and things like that. So then instead of it just being shut down, I have a chance to defend my stance, right? But then equally, people, maybe the social media platforms could say, me as a user, I could say, hey, you know what? I want to see everything in my feed, but anything that shows up as unsubstantiated, I don't really want to see any of those things. So then that way, I could choose to opt out of seeing stuff that, is probably just inflammatory or stuff like that, right? So that's my view, where the social medias could step in and offer tools, because in the case of Wikipedia, that's all done by the populace, right? And so maybe I as a Facebook user, Facebook doesn't have to be the one that goes in and censors, but I could go in there and say, I'd like a citation on this, and then the poster could say, oh, here's the citation, or even some other third-party person, they could step in and say, oh, actually, yeah, I checked on it, and here's how it's true or not. Kind of like the equivalent where when someone sends me an email that seems really far-fetched, you might send them to Snopes and say, oh, it looks like they've already debunked this, and stuff like that, where a post on social media can have kind of a a verification process that can happen. And not saying that all posts have to be verified, because, if I'm posting stuff about my breakfast and stuff like that, like some things aren't as important, but when certain articles start reaching, thousands and millions of views, then it's important that people know that, just because this was forwarded a million times doesn't mean it's any more true. You kind of, at that point, it kind of needs to be raised up a level in the truth checking.
Yeah, so those are some great thoughts. Appreciate everyone's comments. I think what Clint's talking to is the proper way just to ban things, or is it to say, let's shed some more light on this? Now, if Facebook and Twitter and Google and others want to say, hey, this isn't cited to sources we like, okay, but still let it be there. Or if they want to say, hey, here's the opposite view. But the thing that's happening, even if they started doing that, is the trend right now is that they like a certain narrative, and you can really see how they're pursuing that narrative. You can find it in their algorithms and different things. And so going back to this principle we talked about with religion, with these prayers and the Satanists coming in, and the Satanists are saying, hey, you have to let us pray because you're letting the other ones pray. I've often wondered if we can take the approach, even though Facebook isn't a governmental entity, Facebook falls under non-discrimination laws. And I think that as good people around the country, we can look and say, it's not proper for Facebook to pick a group it likes and one it doesn't like, or a certain viewpoint it likes and doesn't like. Because at the end of the day, aren't we being isn't the person that's being banned over, for example, saying that abortion is murder, that is Facebook saying we like certain types and we don't like others. And there are non-discrimination laws in place that apply to private entities. We can't discriminate on the basis of religion or on sex, gender, race, all these things. And so why is the most fundamental freedom in America, the freedom of speech, why do we get to discriminate on that basis? There's actually already laws in place. For example, they've said for candidate purposes that if a billboard company agrees to take one candidate's billboards, they have to take all candidates' billboards. They can choose to say, we don't do candidate news at all, no political stuff. But the second they take a candidate's billboard, they can't then turn down another candidate because the law says that would be discriminatory. And 14th Amendment says we don't like discrimination. That's the current status quo in America. We don't like discrimination. But for whatever reason in that narrative, we've left out this aspect of, hey, what this really is in a lot of ways when we start picking and choosing fake news is that ultimately there's many things we can't verify. It's just the way it is. For example, can I verify for sure that the Utah legislature is essentially bribing these lobbyists? No. But I sure believe that based on the letter. It's sure something that I see and I look at and say, wow, this is incredibly troubling to me. I want to share this with people. But it's not something I can prove. And again, we need to be able to talk, let people listen to all sides of it and things. And so I am a huge proponent of tools and things like that. But at the end of the day, I'm also a proponent of saying, hey, this is my freedom of speech. This is my freedom of the press. As a member of the press, publishing on Facebook, you can't discriminate against me based on my content. Sure, put all the labels you want on it. Label it fake news if you determine it's fake news, maybe even. But don't just kick it off. Don't ban me from here, because then I'm being kicked out because they don't like me and they don't like my views. And even if they're false, again, in the world's eyes currently, how many things have been false in the world's eyes before? When the Galileo or the earth being flat or these people being burned by churches even back in the day because they'd say things scientifically that we now accept as true, but they were the crazies of the time that believed something. And so anyways, it's an interesting point, a lot of interesting issues here, but I think it's imperative that as people, we really understand and stand up for the rights of people to say things and speak things and share belief. A lot of these things come to us. This one, we are out of time today, so we will have to end here at 8:30. This was one that I'll have to talk about later on the right to gather and assemble and petition the government. There's no court cases in Utah on these things yet. I can't say no. There is one that touched on it. But there's been some very interesting issues coming up with coronavirus. And so we'll have to, again, dive into this more with some of the future ones. But we appreciate you attending today. Hope it was worth your time. We'll keep doing this. Wednesdays, again, right now are scheduled for principles of law that we'll go through in the same way, but they're legal-based. Fridays are more constitutional-based. But feel free to reach out if you have any questions. If you have things you would like to discuss going on, let me know. We can certainly work those in. And we hope that you have a great Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks, Austin.
Thank you much.
Thank you all.